Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show. It is the 10th of September, 2019. It is 6 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm doing the live stream a little earlier tonight. I got a Skype interview that I'm doing with the Northern New Jersey Weather Observers at 7:15. So you guys getting your live stream a little sooner, and then I'll be talking with the folks over at NJ Weather Observers. Tonight we're going to be talking about the usual weather stuff that we talk about, short range, medium, and long range. But we're going to get into the tropics because I think that by this time next week we will probably have at least one tropical system, possibly two. I think the system that is now north of the Dominican Republic and Haiti and approaching the eastern Bahamas is possibly going to develop into something when it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. And it looks to me, if you looked at the Hurricane Center's forecast today, they've got these three areas of disturbed weather, the two in the tropical Atlantic. The one that is furthest to the east, I think, is the one that has a fairly good chance of developing, and I think that's the one that the weather models have been keying on for the last several days. And of course, we've seen models go in all sorts of different directions with regards to intensity and everything else. And as you know, I have said many times, really just kind of stay away from that at this stage, particularly beyond day 5. The interesting thing about it to me is the way the longer range upper air pattern seems to be evolving going forward over the next couple of weeks. So that I think is going to be quite fascinating indeed to watch. First of all, to see if it verifies the way it's been showing, and if it does, that could have all sorts of implications down the road. Today is the statistical peak of the hurricane season, September the 10th. Activity in general tends to drop off a bit as we go through the rest of September, but it still remains high. Then there's another bump up in early October for a second mini peak around the mid-month period, and then after that you get this sort of rapid decline going through the rest of October and then through the month of November, which is the last month of the official hurricane season, although you certainly could have storms outside the June through November timeframe. So let's start off tonight. We're going to start with the WPC's weather prediction for the next 7 days. And as you know, I like to look at this, and I think it's a useful thing to look at, A, because the folks at WPC do a pretty good job, and B, you can certainly discern some clues as to what's going through their minds. And the thing that stands out to me is the fact that you've got all this moisture and all this rain that's being shown from off the east coast of Florida and also off the west coast of Florida in the northeast Gulf of Mexico, where we see a max of 5-inch max there, or 4-inch max, depending on how you read the scale. I'm not the most color-savvy person in the world, so I'm not 100% sure if it's the 4-inch or the 5-inch. But let's just, for sake of argument, say it's the 5-inch. And this is telling me that system that is north of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, Tim Pendleton, you pointed that out in the pre-show chat, that's what WPC is picking on, crossing Florida and getting into the northeastern Gulf. Looking at the upper air for early next week, it appears to me that conditions are going to be favorable for something to try and develop. Now, whether it has enough time to do it, where is there, is there any kind of surface flow, and where is it going to be? Is it close to land? Is it far enough offshore? It's tricky in the Gulf of Mexico because if they're moving straight across from east to west, that's a long distance from western Florida to the east coast of Texas. You're talking, a good 600 miles going across, if not a bit more. But on the other hand, if you're shooting it at an angle and you're running it up northwestward toward the Florida Panhandle, that is a far shorter distance. And the other part of this equation, of course, is the Gulf of Mexico water temperatures, which are running up in the upper 80s to, in some cases, close to 90. So that can, and we saw what happened with Hurricane Michael last year and how the very warm Gulf of Mexico waters and the ideal upper air conditions got Michael down to a Category 5, and that was in the early part of October. In the meantime, in the east, it's not that wet. Rainfall amounts generally well under a half an inch, and in some cases well under a quarter of an inch. You've got some heavy-duty rains going on up in the northern plains and in the western Great Lakes. A little bit less so as you head down to the southern plains, but you are seeing some rainfall, higher rainfall amounts in parts of North Texas and into Oklahoma, and also along the immediate Gulf Coast in southeast Texas. And then it kind of tails off a bit as you go westward. You've got some rainfall amounts of pockets of 1 to 2 inch rainfall amounts up and down the Rockies. The southwest is dry. The northwest is a bit on the wet side, particularly up in the extreme northwestern part of Washington State. So WPC's at least giving us an idea that they see something with that system that is north of the Dominican Republic. Now, as far as tonight is concerned, just taking a look at SPC, the Storm Prediction Center, they've got an enhanced risk and a working tornado watch in eastern Wyoming and through parts of Nebraska and South Dakota. Enhanced risk there in northernmost Nebraska. Well, it's hard to see where the border is. Northernmost Nebraska and on up into southern parts of South Dakota. Too many lines kind of overlapping up and down, but you can see where all the action is there. A small area of marginal risk in southeastern Michigan, which includes Detroit. And of course, here we are from southern New England all the way down into North Carolina, where there's hardly a chance for a thunderstorm, no chance for thunderstorm activity tonight. And I think that really that played out quite well today in the absolute lack of activity, even though we had clouds and you have what looks like a warm frontal setup, but it's so weak you can barely find it, that the mechanisms just weren't there for even a pop-up downpour too. There were a couple of very, very light spot showers that I ran into today around midday, but that was about it. Now, of course, the sun is out over much of our area, my area anyway. As the clouds have shifted up to the north, you can actually see the upper high to a certain extent. You see a little bit of clockwise turning in the cloud cover, so that tells you that we have a ridge in the southeast. The disturbed weather that's north of the Dominican Republic has actually increased since yesterday, started increasing last night, and it continues to increase today, although it still lacks any kind of organization, so I'm not really seeing any kind of low developing there. And you've got some disturbed weather that's popped up in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. Not anything important associated with that. Otherwise, we're waiting to see the action with the severe weather that's going to occur up in the western plains with that enhanced area of severe weather. So let's look at we'll look at the surface map and bring that up to speed here. Hold on. A little slow on the uptake today, folks. There we go. So here's our surface map. I'm starting with the southeast tonight because this is where it's been pretty hot. Temperatures are, as of 6 p.m., in the low 90s, but the hot spots include Birmingham at 93, Montgomery at 97. Atlanta was 91 last hour, and then during this hour they had a thunderstorm, and you can see the radar echoes I put on top of it. So the temperatures dropped down from 91 to 82 there, but we've got mostly lower 90s this evening in parts of Georgia, and there's a 99 here. Where is that? 99 in Andalusia, or Andalusia. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. If I'm not, forgive me. Andalusia Municipal Airport in southern Alabama, at 99, and it's low 90s in the Florida Panhandle. Moving up the coast, you're seeing those scattered echoes again, but then they just cut off, and nothing of consequence in North Carolina or Virginia. A little echo there to the west of right touching Virginia Tech Airport, where it's 81. But everybody right now mid 80s, mid to upper 80s. And of course, the clouds and the onshore wind kept the temperatures down in from northern New Jersey through southern New England. It's in the low to mid 70s now, but the winds are gone around now to more to the south, and they're going to go around to the southwest overnight and during the day on Wednesday. And this is going to bring some of that very warm to borderline hot air to our south. It's going to bring that on up as the flow direction, which is always important. You got to look at the wind direction at all times of the year, of course. But this time of year, you get that onshore wind, the ocean water temperatures. It's not like the spring where they're in the 40s, but the ocean water's in the low and mid 70s. So that does have an impact if you have a prolonged onshore flow, and then you add a little bit of cloud cover to that, and that puts a lid on temperatures. But meanwhile, you go out west of the mountains in through Ohio and on up through Kentucky, and you've got this southwest flow. Temperatures in the low and even some middle 90s here. I'm seeing, as of 2 o'clock this afternoon anyway, seeing some numbers 94, 97 in and around and south of Louisville and into parts of southwestern Kentucky, and also very warm low to mid 90s in parts of Tennessee. And meanwhile, it's mid to upper 80s. And here you got this frontal boundary here with the weak low up in northern Wisconsin. Now we do have another cold front that's going to be coming through later tomorrow night and early Thursday that will put an end to Wednesday's very warm temperatures, and then we're going to cool off again for a day or two as we start playing games with the onshore flow. All right, so I'm going to come back to this. And I want to jump now onto the tropics, and I want to start off with this first wave that you see here out in the Atlantic. Here's the Dominican Republic and Haiti. I'm in trouble with the pen. This is Puerto Rico here, of course, and then you have Cuba there, and the Bahamas, and of course everybody knows where Florida is. So this is the area that has been out here. It's persisted for the last couple of days. It's been slowly moving to the west-northwest. And as we said, during the overnight and during today, there seems to be a little bit of an increase in the thunderstorm activity. You're also seeing, if you look at the orientation, you're getting a little bit of curvature there. You're going to want to see that curvature, how it changes overnight and into tomorrow. But one of the things I'm noticing is you're getting some cloud tops getting blown off to the northeast. So there's probably a little bit of shear going on in this area at the moment. So this is where I don't think conditions are really conducive for this to develop. But when we get back later on this week, as this thing slowly makes its way west or west-northwestward, by the time we get toward the end of the week and into the weekend, you're going to have much better conditions aloft in the eastern Gulf of Mexico and over western Florida and down into the Florida states that will possibly give this an opportunity to form. The first thing I would look for is some kind of a low to develop here later this week, maybe somewhere down from the southern Bahamas to off the north shore of Cuba, and you'll just see that pressures it may not be a closed low, but you'll probably notice that pressures will start dropping in this area. So that'll be a clue as to whether this system is going to be able to organize or not. And I think, to me, from what I looked at today, and Patreon members, you got that post this afternoon talking about this. I think from what I saw today that you are going to get those kind of conditions that will be more favorable when we get this a little bit further to the west. Now, in the meantime, as we take a look at the wider satellite view, you have the two tropical waves in the Atlantic. You have this one here, the one that is closest, and this is the one that the Hurricane Center has been talking about for quite some time, from the moment it moved off the African coast, and they gave it a high chance of developing. And over the last couple of days, they've lowered that probability considerably. But if you look closely here, you can actually see on the northern fringe of that wave, the clouds are actually coming in from the east and then rotating around in a counterclockwise fashion. So there is some kind of weak low in this. The problem is that you don't have a concentrated area of convection near the center. You just have a broad weak low, and it's moving along slowly toward the west. The winds, if you look at the clouds in the eastern Caribbean, they're going in this direction toward the northeast. So the upper air winds are not really going to be conducive for this system to develop. On the other hand, I think this is the wave to watch, the one that's coming off the African coast. It's a large wave, it's disorganized, but you can actually, there's probably some kind of broad low that is now moving off the African coast, and this is going to be moving along to the west. And also, as we go through the weekend, you're going to have a big high, a big ridge, a narrow ridge, but there's going to be a strong east-west ridge in the Atlantic building. And I think that's going to create a bit of a faster flow to move the system along to the west, maybe at about 15 or 20 miles an hour, somewhere in there, and then it'll move right along. And as we go through next week, late in the weekend and into next week, I think you're going to find that once it gets west of 50 degrees west, you're going to see conditions here becoming more favorable for tropical cyclone development. Now, I got this map up here. This is we're looking at the 200 millibar level, which is roughly at about 27,000 feet or so. And this is a really important level with regards to tropical systems, because you want to, tropical systems, warm core systems, tend to be their strongest near the surface, and as you go up into the atmosphere, they tend to be less defined. In fact, the strongest hurricanes are the ones that actually have high pressures sitting on top of them, and when we're talking about high pressure, we're talking about high pressure at the 200 millibar level, at this level of the atmosphere. Now, when we look at this map, it's showing us strong winds in the upper atmosphere. It's also showing us in those really thin lines with the arrows. These are the H's, the highs and lows at that high level at 27,000 feet. So the red L is the surface low, but there's actually a little weak high that is over that surface low. Now, when you get the upper air anticyclone or high to be really strong, and everything else being equal, that you wind up, if you have a good outflow setting up, this is a precursor to tropical storm formation and eventually an intensifying tropical system. This is from earlier today. If you want to go a little further, we can identify the upper low at that level of the atmosphere that's sitting out here in the Atlantic. So when you look at the winds at the 200 millibar level out in this part of the Atlantic, they're pretty strong. And they're also very strong across the Northeast Caribbean and then out across the Atlantic. Again, that's at that level of the atmosphere. It's not the level that is steering the system. The lower level winds are actually moving it along, because remember, this system is strongest near the bottom, and in the weak tropical systems, they're going to move with the low level winds. They're not they're shallow systems, so they don't have a mechanism that goes well up into the atmosphere so that winds at other levels of the atmosphere impact their movement. So when we take a look at this lead system, one of the things you'll notice is that there's not really much of an upper high with this. And in fact, as we go through tonight and into Wednesday, the surface low is sandwiched in between strong winds that are to the north of it, and also a little bit of stronger winds to the south of it. So this is going to keep it, I think, from really developing. And when you march along into Thursday and Friday, you really can't find any identifiable feature left with this. But on the other hand, let's go back now, go out to the east and take a look at what's coming off the African coast with this wave that's moving off tonight. It is actually coming off with its own upper high over it. So it already has something working in its favor, and as you move across, that upper high is actually very well defined and gets even better defined as we head toward Saturday and Saturday night into Sunday. You can see it right here. This is Sunday morning, and right here we have a very strong upper high. So underneath this, you're going to probably find your surface low trying to develop. Now, we'll check the other levels later, but this is also setting up a good outflow pattern across the Leeward Islands in the upper atmosphere. So this says to me that that second wave is going to run into a much more favorable environment. And indeed, when we get to Sunday evening, the GFS is actually developing a low there. It's got 1,007 low that it forms and takes over the northern leewards and south of Puerto Rico and near the Dominican Republic. And this is as far as we have at this point, which is on Tuesday. The bottom line is, though, in terms of the development, is to pay less attention to the specifics, particularly after the fourth or fifth day, and take a look more at what the upper air looks like. It's going to hold on to this upper high pretty much all the way through. You still have, at that level of the atmosphere, a big upper high sitting over it. So the conditions here are going to be favorable for development. Obviously, if you're dealing with a system, it's not just the upper high. It's also going to be low-level inflow and a long list of things that you got to look at, as well as the fact that on this particular run, you're seeing it moving over the islands in Puerto Rico in some form. So if terrain's going to have an impact. Look, the bottom line is that conditions are favorable. Now we just have to wait and see whether something is going to come out of this and is going to develop. Now, I'm going to switch regions. And just give me a second here. So let's go to, I want to go to, no, that's not the view I want. I'd rather have the Gulf of Mexico view, this one here. So we can take a look at the other system. So let's run back and go talk about the system that we're dealing with tonight, which is sitting over north of the Dominican Republic. And we'll just mark it by this line somewhere in there. And this is moving generally toward the west. Again, notice here you don't have any kind of real upper high over it. You've got at that level of the atmosphere, you're looking at winds that are, I'm trying to get a nice blue in here. I'm not the best when it comes to colors. Why is it on the screen, it looks a lot brighter, and then it doesn't look the same way when I do it. So if you look at the upper air winds here, they're all westerly, and this is not a situation that would be conducive for tropical storm development. You've got very strong winds at that level of the atmosphere, so there's a lot of wind shear, so you're going to have a tough time. Even though those thunderstorms are trying to develop, those upper air winds are going to prevent anything of consequence forming. Going forward, however, let me just erase all this. And going forward, as we move through Thursday and Friday and into the weekend, you have some changes. Now, an upper low is dropping down into the north-central Gulf of Mexico, just east of New Orleans, south of the Florida Panhandle. So now you're starting to see then that upper low actually then winds up pulling northwestward. So you're setting up with a flow at that level of the atmosphere from the south-southwest. In the meantime, the wind shear is getting pushed a little bit further to the north. Winds are lightening up considerably across the Florida Straits, and we're now at early Saturday morning. So you're gradually coming into an area where conditions are going to be more favorable. And in fact, when we go to Saturday night, we actually have, there's an actual little upper high here, and I also just saw that a little low popped up at the surface, and your stronger winds producing some outflow out to the west. So I think in general that conditions here are going to become more favorable, and that once this system gets into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, it has a shot of developing. But the bigger issue to me is going to be, okay, where is it going? How quickly is it going to the northwest? Does it go into the coast by Sunday afternoon, which gives it very little time to become much of anything? Or is it going to spend more time out in the open waters of the Gulf? So this is going to be an interesting weekend and early part of next week, because we'll have that to watch over the weekend. And then, of course, I think we're going to have something that is going to be coming out from the tropical Atlantic and making its way west or west-northwestward for as far as it can, for as long as it can, before it gets impacted by other factors and the upper winds across the U.S., which we're going to get to right now. So let's turn this off. Turn it off. Oh, it doesn't want to turn off. That's odd. Okay, we'll have to just erase. Okay. That didn't work either. Hang on. I am still getting the hang of this. All right. All right, so let's go to this surface. Let's stay here, and we'll take a look at what the GFS is saying anyway. And by the way, the European today was fairly consistent with the GFS for both of these systems, trying to do something. Notice, by the way, going back to a couple of days ago, it's taking a little longer for all these things to play themselves out. But here's the one in the Gulf that moves up northwestward. GFS has it close to or just east of New Orleans by Sunday night. And then, of course, you've got the one coming in into the Leeward Islands. So at this point, this is day 5.5. So after here, remember that the margin of error gets pretty wide. And there's also another little system, the GFS pops up there east of the windwards. And this is as far as it goes. And you know what? This is probably as far as I want to take you through today with respect to the tropical systems, because there's no point in really getting worked up or not worked up, or however you want to react to these things with regards to any specifics beyond the day 6 time frame. But one of the things that I found interesting today, and this sort of started late yesterday with the longer term pattern, I want to take out I'm going to use the 12Z map because we have it out far enough. Of course, you remember what is the pattern, everybody? The jet in Canada flexes back and forth. The ridge along the east coast and off the east coast flexes, and it ebbs and flows. And you get the jet to come down. It pulls back up. So, of course, obviously, we've got this ridge building in the east right now, and you can see it here. There's your upper high. You have shortwave troughs that are out in the west. You've got one here. There's one off the west coast. And then you've got this upper low in Greenland. We were so used to seeing a blocky pattern up through Greenland for most of the summer. So now you've got an upper low there, and your upper air winds blowing from in Canada down into northern New England and then out into the open waters of the Atlantic. So going forward, we get a short wave that comes through here into New England on Thursday. Cold front comes through early Thursday. The ridge is still there. Another short wave kind of lifts up into southeastern Canada over the weekend, so it'll bring another weak front through. But notice here, again, as we head into Sunday. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Let's see. This is what I wanted. But here you go. You got this upper high that is off the east coast right there. and your jet is running like this. When I say it's a flat high, when I make reference to the fact that when I make reference to the fact that the high is flat, what I mean is that it's kind of narrow in scope. It doesn't go that far to the north, and it doesn't go that far to the south. When a ridge is strong, you're going to see that look more like this, okay, as opposed to east-west. It almost looks like a sausage to some extent when I'm talking about a flat high. And when a high is flat, it's because the northern part of the jet is kind of pressing down on it, but it doesn't get all the way south. Going into next week, you have the ridge popping up again, only this time it pops up over the Great Lakes, and now, of course, you've got this system that's off the East Coast. So let's forget about that for now and just focus on everything else. But there is some indication, and I don't know if this is being driven by recurving typhoons, but when typhoons recurve into the westerlies like they do in the Atlantic, they can have impact in causing lows to form in the Gulf of Alaska, which is what it's kind of doing here in the long range. It's done it for several runs in one form or another, and you wind up with a fairly deep trough here. This is, way in the long range. We're just speaking in theory, but you run with a fairly deep trough here. I also find it interesting that you've got a low at 50 and 50, and blockiness developing all over the place again up in the North Atlantic. Now, whether this is reality or not remains to be seen, but the GFS has done this for a few runs in a row. I want to see if it continues to carry over the next couple of days. But this is a very interesting pattern to have show up toward the end of September. For one thing, if this were correct, you would have some rather chilly air for this time of year coming down into the plains and Great Lakes. And in the meantime, you also would have access to some cooler air on the backside of this upper low at 50 and 50. So you'll have some cooler air funneling down out of eastern Canada, and of course complicating all this is whether there's some kind of tropical system in play that is moving up out of the Atlantic. So this is going to be a very interesting long-range pattern to watch going forward. And certainly you're going to see a lot of changes in all of in the models in terms of specifics going forward, and don't be too shocked. There's going to be all sorts of model roller coasters, but I think we probably have some interesting times ahead of us with respect to these tropical systems. The hurricane season ain't done yet, not by a long shot. So on the new GFS, as far as the short-range weather is concerned, of course, we're talking about hot and humid weather conditions tomorrow, a continuation of more of the same in the southeast. That's not going to change with that upper high. You have late this week a fairly wrapped-up surface low up in North Dakota, so there's likely to be thunderstorms there and maybe some severe weather in the western lakes and in the upper Mississippi Valley. The next high drops down from eastern Canada to the New England coast, so we'll cool off Thursday and especially on Friday. In my area, temperatures not going to be probably not going to be much above the 70s in most places, and in some cases only the lower 70s. But that high moves out to Nova Scotia and then drops southward. So we're back to a southwest flow here over the weekend, which is very warm and humid until a weather front of consequence moves through, which looks like it'll be maybe Sunday night or Monday. And then here comes the next high, and then that moves out, and now you're starting to see the impacts of the models seeing some kind of tropical system off the east of the Bahamas, if it's even really there, and building high pressure coming down from eastern Canada. So that's really as far out as we're going to take you on this. And yes, by the way, for those of you who are really looking at this closely, which I'm so sure many of you are, right in here, we mentioned it yesterday, there's a little bit of snow, okay? And if you're going to have troughing in the west, as we go through, we're at September 19th on this. So as we go, the month we start to go to the latter part of the month, it wouldn't be a big shocker to start seeing some of the white stuff. I'm going to go to the 12Z run, and just for laughs, because it's all it really is, just for laughs. I wanted to look at the total snowfall through the 10-day period. As of, maps are loading, not quite there. So there's your 384-hour total snowfall. And we do have some pockets showing up in the northern and central Rockies. And if we pull up the North America view, seeing snow way up in Alaska and northern Canada and over Greenland, which is where it's supposed to be for the most part for this time of year. But just want to give you snow lovers something to start salivating over, even though you're months away from your first snowflakes of the late fall and early winter season. Got a ways to go before we get there. We still have a good chunk of hurricane season left to play through. Okay, so I'm back with all of you on the chat, and there you go. So, like I said, I think we have a lot of stuff to watch. Paul Roman, does the tropics activity play a part in how the winter plays out? This comes up from time to time. I think it's partly because everybody wants to have that magic bullet connection to say that something is going to cause something else, and there really isn't much that you can get from the tropical storm season with regards to hurricane season. Although the one thing, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it, in general, is a late running hurricane season would probably be indicative of a warmer than average pattern. But that's a very broad statement to make. And it also depends on where you are in the United States. But a late running hurricane season might be an indicator of a winter that may be more back-end loaded as opposed to front-end loaded. So that's maybe a broad takeaway that you can get from the kind of hurricane season it is. But in terms of saying if it's an active year, you're going to have an active winter, or if it's an active year, you're going to have an inactive winter, or if it's an inactive hurricane season, are you going to have, you can make all the combinations you want. No, I really don't think there's much of a tie. Again, other than the fact that if you have a season that's running late on the hurricane side, it might be an indicator that the winter is going to be a little bit more back-end loaded in the east than front-end loaded. Yes, David Schwartz, you can guarantee that if you have the 50-50 low now, you're not going to see it in December, January, or February. Although, as I've said many times, rather than focus on that because the negative, the Greenland block seems to be so elusive in the wintertime, I would rather have the Pacific be right as far as snow is concerned, rather than having to think about whether there's going to be blocking or not. I don't think blocking in general is vastly overrated, and you can have too much of it, which we actually saw last December at one point, the big snowstorm that they had from Virginia southward. There was too much blocking, and it was forced well to the south, and we never saw a flake or an ice pellet from that up here. So you could certainly have too much of a good thing. Running back through the chat to see if you guys have left any other questions, except I see that you're talking about chicken soup, chicken dumplings. You're making me hungry. Okay. Robert Hurley, this is the one I think the East Coast should keep an eye on. Well, I will say this, if something does develop, the fact that you seem to have some kind of upper air pattern realignment showing up in some of the longer range models should perhaps give a little pause with regards to having a tropical storm running around when that's happening. So the models are putting out clues right now. Not the specifics are not gonna be there, but the models are putting out some clues that if we are still seeing this over the next couple of days, particularly as we get toward the weekend, if we're still seeing this type of setup, then I think we're going to have to start paying a little bit closer attention. Does the euro, Ryan Ford, and I'm fine, by the way, Howard Vanderhoff, thank you. I will check the link you sent me. I still haven't had a chance, but I will have a chance later this evening. Does the euro go out far enough to see if it matches up with the GFS in terms of blocking and troughiness at the end of the month? Some people who have access to the euro beyond day 10 and get all the long-range stuff, they can see it. I can't see it, and I haven't really looked to see whether, sometimes you'll see it pop up or somebody will mention it on some on a weather group or two on Facebook. But I haven't really had any kind of time to look, and I haven't even seen any posts scroll up on my feed. So if something should show up and catch my attention, I'll give it a mention tomorrow. But I haven't seen anything so far. Johnny Quest, if the Gulf stays very warm through late fall, will that power up nor'easters? It might and it might not, because you got to have. It's not just that. You got to have. You could have the Gulf of Mexico as warm as it could be during November and December, but if the jet stream pattern in the United States is all wrong, suppose you have a big ridge across the South and across the Gulf states that's keeping things much warmer than average there. Then if you have that present in the East, I think that would not be a pattern conducive for nor'easters. Now, I'm just sort of doing this off the top of my head. I can envision other ways where it might be, but I wouldn't put too much faith into that. I think that's another one of those. If you that we're always sort of looking for that, as I said, that magic bullet that'll give you the absolute answer. We've got A and B, therefore C has to happen. Unfortunately, you could have A and B. And C might happen if D, E, and F, and G, and H, and I, and all the way to Z are in place. 99 Wolves, you're having typing trouble, I see. Okay, yes. Who is at Trump 2020? What do I say about the Almanac winter forecast? Well, since I happen to know one of the persons that puts that together, I'll defer to him when the time comes. Okay, I honestly look. It's fun stuff. It's fun stuff and good reading. There is there is some weather that goes into that, and a few other things that go into that, and there are different almanacs that come up with different forecasts. I think if you read it, you can make it apply to whatever's going on and say, hey, it got this. But remember, there's to say it's going to be in my area. If you say it's not going to rain on any day, you're going to be right 75% of the time, 70 to 75% of the time. So there's no real skill in that. 70% skills to get it right 70% of the time when it doesn't rain 70% of the time is not really doesn't say anything. So just remember that. It's fun reading though. And I know the snow lovers want to grasp at anything that's going to make for a colder and snowy winter. I don't have any idea. I'm not a long range guy. I've said that many times. It'll be what it will be. And the best thing for me, I think the most fun is watching it evolve in the short range. There's nothing I can tell you now that's going to be useful to you in regards to the answer to that question. All right, Weather and Low, do we get to 20 named storms? I think that might be a bit of a stretch, if only because of the fact that we are through G, so we're 7 through, which means we'd have to have 13 named storms to get to your 20. And we're past the statistical peak. That might be really tough. Now, the record, 9 hurricanes occurred after the statistical peak in 2010, as Anthony Orr, one of our resident statisticians, along with the chairman Scott Briller, but Anthony pointed that out to me this morning. So, in 2010, 9 hurricanes occurred after the statistical peak, which is today. So if we have, just let's say we have 9 more storms, that would put us at 17. All right. So I think 20 might be pushing it, but who knows with the long range. No, Dorian is not the longest track, Joseph Gaffney. I think if you go look, in 1969, it was Hurricane Faith, which started out in the tropical Atlantic, wound up recurving before it got close to the U.S., and they were able to follow it all the way up into the Arctic regions, well to the northeast of Greenland. So that, I think, was one of the longest tracks in terms of distance covered. And in terms of number of days being around, it's not even close. I think the record is like 32 or 33 days. And it may have been set in the last 5 years by I forgot what storm it was. But I have to go back and look. But I know it's in the last 5 or 6 years there was one that lasted over a month. Brian Ford, you get the last question. Last question. Is it possible to get a tropical system of consequence, Cat 2 or higher, in the dead of winter? No, not in the east. No, that would not happen. The atmosphere is just not there, and neither are the water temperatures, because they do cool off even in those areas far to the south, and the upper air winds are just way too strong, too far south. So the answer is no. You can barely get. We had that hurricane in the middle of in the north central Atlantic in January, and that was sort of isolated out there. And we've had the odd tropical storms in April. We've seen tropical storms and hurricanes in December. They're extremely rare to see them in the dead of winter in those areas, and usually when they do pop up, they don't last. Okay, gotta go. Coming up on 6:45, and I got a live weather to do on TV tonight. So that's 7:00. So thanks for being here, everybody. Appreciate it as always. Patreon members. No, I didn't do a weather in 10 today because there really wasn't too much happening. So there will be, probably will do one tomorrow as we start to look to see what's going on as we get closer to the weekend. And we'll, of course, take a look at the tropics. And for those of you who are interested, my weather platform on Patreon is just $2 a month. You get extra live streams, extra posts. You can message me anytime. So for the weather geek in you, that might be a good place to be. And it gets me a couple of cigars at the end of the month, and I'm happy. And by the way, speaking of which, just also very quickly, and where is it? Here we go. I do have an Amazon link that if you use to do your Amazon shopping, Amazon will throw me back a couple of cigars and a few fishing lure on their dime. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Just use the search bar and shop. We are a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. And finally, I'm getting faster with this. For those of you who have not yet done so, why, I don't know, but if you haven't done it yet, download my free weather app, which works on all mobile devices, and you can have it here, and it'll go, if you have an Android, it will go to your own location as far as the local forecast is concerned. There's Zoom radar on it, which is a great tool. It's not only just the radar, but you can put temperatures on it, wind, watches, warnings, storm reports, and everything else. Plus, you get all my observations with regards to local weather and the long range. And that is the link to that. And that app, by the way, is absolutely free. But if you choose, you can support it. You can do it by using the Amazon link to do your Amazon shopping, or you can join my platform on Patreon. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for being here, and we will see you